Hi everybody. There are several obstacles to underwater photography in conditions where the visibility is extremely poor. You have to navigate the dive site, not get lost, not lose your dive buddy, find a suitable subject, and then create an image which is relatively clear and doesn't have too much backscatter. My wife and I recently did a dive at the Blue Heron Bridge in South Florida, where throughout the entire dive the visibility was no greater than 2 to 3 feet. We had devised a plan and some strategies for how we might get some decent pictures. Let's check it out. We decided to stay only 6 to 8 inches above the seafloor in an attempt to find some small subjects. The depth at the Blue Heron Bridge ranges from 3 feet to no deeper than 20 feet. I took a random shot of the seafloor to make sure my single strobe was firing. You can see a lot of backscatter in this image and imagine the poor visibility. We stayed right next to each other so as not to lose each other. We couldn't see most navigational landmarks, so we used a compass and surfaced a few times to make sure we were in the desired location. We moved really slowly to look for potential subjects. With super macro, we need to find a stationary subject that would allow a very close approach so we could focus precisely. My setup was a Nikon D7100, a 2x teleconverter, and 60mm macro lens. I shot super macro for several reasons. I will be extremely close to the subject, so the water column would be very small and would contain less particulate matter to illuminate. Also, the minimal depth of field with super macro means a lot of the backscatter would be blurred out. And finally, super macro allows me to avoid monotonous or open water backgrounds, which show more backscatter. Here's the camera setup with the lens and teleconverter attached. I used a shutter speed of 1 to 200 seconds, a small aperture, f20 or smaller, and the lowest ISO. I also added a retractable +10 wet diopter, here you see attached to the flat port. A single strobe was used which illuminates the entire image in super macro, and you will note that the strobe is pulled in really close to the flat port and aimed at the subject. Here's my first attempt at photographing a small batfish. My flat port was about 2 feet away from the fish. Things looked pretty hopeless with all the particulate matter in the water. Here I am much closer and better focused on the backfish. You will notice a lot of the backscatter in the open water portion of the image at your left, but in front of the fish there is less backscatter. Now I got much closer to its mouth, the port was only about 2 to 3 inches away. The subject now fills most of the frame, so there's less open water visible in the image and less water column. I cropped this image slightly to further reduce the open water portion of the image in the frame, and it took me less than a minute to edit out what little remaining backscatter there was to create this image. Might not be the greatest, but it's a cool shot of its mouth. Now, going very slowly on this dive allowed us time to spot some really small subjects like this tiny brittle star on a much larger sea star. At left, note the fibers on the edge of my dive glove finger for scale. The subject was only about 2 inches away from my wet diopter. The water column was really small. I didn't even bother editing out any of the little bit of backscatter in this image. I moved even closer and set my single strobe at an acute angle to reduce backscatter even more and get some shadows and texture. I'm quite pleased with this image of this tiny little subject. We spotted a small scorpion fish. This fish was the size of a quarter. My wet diopter lens was only about 1.5 inches from the fish, and you'll again notice very little backscatter with such a small water column and minimal depth of field. We found a somewhat larger scorpion fish and photographed its eye. Going very slowly allowed me also to spot my first bumblebee shrimp ever, here again on a sea star. At the bottom of the image you can see part of my dive buddy's gloved finger for scale. This shrimp was the size of a grain of rice. I flipped down my +10 wet diopter and got really close and got my favorite images of the dive. This tiny bumblebee shrimp was about 1 inch away from my wet diopter. It's amazing how much detail you can see in this super macro image of such a tiny subject in such poor visibility. So, in extremely low visibility, we used a compass to navigate, stayed side by side, just above the seafloor, and moved very slowly in an attempt to find suitable subjects. We looked for small stationary subjects that would allow a close approach and precise focus. Super macro allowed me to get a clear image with minimal backscatter because of the small water column, the minimal depth of field, and the very small open water background. Well, I hope you found this helpful. Even in conditions where the visibility is extremely poor, it's not impossible to get some decent underwater images. Thanks for your attention.